The testimony you are about to watch today will reveal something never before revealed here on YouTube. Prepare yourself. Imagine standing at the edge of eternal damnation and looking into hell itself, only to find something no one expects to see: rows and rows of empty seats, vacant, silent, waiting, and the question immediately follows: who were those seats meant for? And even more unsettling, why are they empty? This is not just a chilling thought experiment. It is a profound mystery that reveals a shocking truth about divine mercy and the path to eternal salvation. Now let me ask you this. What if everything you thought you knew about hell was wrong? What if there are countless souls who should be there, but are not? Tonight, we are going to explore that mystery and uncover the astonishing reason behind hell's empty seats. What you are about to hear is more than a story. It is a revelation of forgiveness so vast that it reshapes our understanding of condemnation and redemption. But there is also a warning. The gates of hell are open, yet some expected arrivals never show. Do you know why? Because this discovery is not only terrifying, it is urgent, and it is also hope. Understanding who did not arrive and why could be the most crucial knowledge you ever gain. It is a message that calls for immediate repentance and true faith before you reach a destiny you may not even realize you are heading toward. So stay with us, listen closely, open your heart, because the testimony you are about to hear may be the wake-up call God is using to reach you before it is too late. Are you ready for the truth?
I want to tell you about the silence. That is the first thing that comes back to me when I close my eyes at night, even now, safely back in my bed in Boise. Most people think of hell as a place of screaming. They think of the wailing, the gnashing of teeth, the chaos of a billion souls burning together. And maybe that exists somewhere. Maybe there are pits of fire where the noise is deafening, but that is not what I saw first. I saw the empty seats. I saw a banquet hall that smelled of dust and rotting velvet, with thousands of chairs arranged in perfect, terrifying rows. And the most horrifying thing about them was not that they were torture devices or covered in spikes. It was that they were reserved. They had names on them, and they were empty. There is a specific kind of terror in seeing a seat that has been held for someone who never arrived. It implies a mistake. It implies that plans were made, that expectations were set, and that someone escaped a trap that had been perfectly designed for them. I stood there, looking at those rows, knowing with a sinking, sickening certainty that I was looking at the reservations for my own family. And I was the only one who had shown up to claim my spot. But before I stood in that hall, before I understood the horror of isolation, I was just Martha. I was a 62-year-old retired school bus driver living in Idaho. I was a woman who prided herself on a clean kitchen, a balanced checkbook, and a life that never made the neighbors whisper. I want you to understand who I was, because it is easy to listen to these stories and think they are only for criminals. It is easy to watch Christian testimonies on the internet or television and think that testimonies of hell are reserved for the cartels, the murderers, or the people who lived wild, reckless lives. I was none of those things. I was the woman who baked casseroles for funerals. I was the woman who ironed her husband's shirts on Sunday nights. I was the woman who drove your children to school safely for 30 years without a single accident. It was a Tuesday in mid-February. The winter had been harsh that year, and the snow was piled up high against the side of the house, gray and hardened by weeks of freezing temperatures. I remember the silence of the house. My husband, Earl, was out at the hardware store, and I was alone in the living room, folding laundry. The television was on low in the background, playing one of those religious talk shows I usually watched while I worked. They were interviewing a man who had been a gang leader before finding God. He was crying, talking about his impactful testimonies and how he had seen the devil face to face. He was covered in tattoos, his voice rough and broken as he described the drugs, the violence, and the moment he fell to his knees in a prison cell. I remember shaking my head, snapping a towel briskly before folding it into a perfect square. I looked at the screen with a feeling that I now recognize as deep, arrogant contempt. I thought to myself that it was a shame people had to fall so low before they learned how to behave. I thought about how I had never needed a near-death experience or some dramatic evangelical testimonies to know right from wrong. I had been in the choir since I was 12. I had never smoked a cigarette. I had never cheated on my taxes. I felt safe. I felt protected by my own decency. That is the most dangerous lie you can ever believe. I was convinced that salvation was something you earned by being polite and keeping your yard tidy. I listened to powerful testimonies of salvation and felt pity, not kinship. I thought I was better than the people telling them. I looked at that man on the screen, weeping over his sins, and I judged him. I judged his past. I judged his emotions. I judged the fact that he needed such a spectacle to get right with God. And while I sat there judging him, I was the one standing on the precipice of eternity without a parachute. I folded Earl's work shirts, placing them in a neat stack on the coffee table. My mind wandered to the phone call I had had earlier that morning with my sister, Sarah. Sarah was the black sheep of our family. She had been divorced 3 times, her children were scattered and angry, and she was always in some sort of financial crisis. She had called to ask for prayer, telling me she was lonely and struggling with depression. I had told her I would pray for her. I used my sweetest, most comforting voice. I told her that God tries us to make us stronger. But as I hung up the phone, I didn't pray. I turned to Earl and said, if she had just listened to me 20 years ago, she wouldn't be in this mess. I didn't feel bad about saying it. I felt justified. I felt that I had earned the right to critique her because my life was in order. My marriage was intact. My house was paid off. I looked at her chaos and used it to fuel my own sense of righteousness. I didn't hate her. I just enjoyed being better than her. It was a subtle poison, tasteless and odorless, but it was filling my veins every single day. I bent down to pick up a pair of Earl's heavy wool socks from the laundry basket. The house was warm, the heater humming a steady rhythm. I was thinking about dinner. I was thinking about whether I should make a pot roast or just heat up the leftovers. The aneurysm did not announce itself. There was no warning pain, no dizziness beforehand. There was no dramatic music, no sense of impending doom. I simply reached for the sock, and then it felt like someone had swung a baseball bat into the base of my skull. It was a physical blow, violent and immediate. I did not even have time to cry out. My vision fractured. The beige walls of my living room seemed to tilt sideways, and the smell of the fabric softener was instantly replaced by the smell of copper, like holding a handful of old pennies in a sweaty palm. I hit the floor hard. I felt the carpet against my cheek, scratchy and synthetic. I tried to push myself up. I tried to call for Earl, but my mouth would not cooperate. My tongue felt heavy, like a piece of dead meat in my mouth. The panic set in then, a cold, sharp spike of fear. I was dying. I knew it. The thought was not profound or poetic. It was just a frantic realization that the roast was still on the counter and the back door was unlocked. I worried about who would find me. I worried that I hadn't vacuumed under the sofa where my face was now pressed. Then the darkness came. It wasn't like falling asleep. Sleep is gradual. You drift. This was like being unplugged. The world just ceased to exist. The pain in my head vanished. The sound of the television cut out. The hum of the heater stopped. I was gone. I expected, if I am being honest, to wake up in light. I expected clouds. I expected to hear a choir, perhaps singing one of the hymns I knew by heart. I expected to see my mother, who had passed 10 years prior, smiling and holding out her hand to welcome me home. I expected a reward. I had lived a good life, hadn't I? I had been a good woman. I had followed the rules. But when I opened my eyes, I was not in heaven. I was standing. That was the first thing that confused me. I had collapsed on the floor, my body broken and failing. But now I was standing upright. My knees felt strong. The arthritis that had plagued me for the last decade was gone. For a brief second, a wave of relief washed over me. I took a deep breath, and my lungs expanded fully, without the catch or wheeze of age. I thought, this is it. I have been healed. I am in glory. Then I looked around. I was not in a garden. I was not in a golden city. I was not surrounded by family or angels. I was standing in a corridor. It looked like the hallway of an old, neglected municipal building. It reminded me of the basement of the county courthouse where I went to renew my tags, or perhaps a wing of a hospital that had been shut down due to funding cuts in the late 70s. The floor was covered in linoleum tiles that were curling up at the corners, revealing patches of black mold underneath. They were a checkered pattern of dirty white and a faded, sickly green. The walls were painted a color I can only describe as the color of a bruise. It was a yellowish green that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. And the light itself was wrong. There were no windows. There was no sun. The light came from long, buzzing fluorescent tubes overhead, some of which were flickering with a maddening, irregular rhythm. Zzt, zzt. The air was cold. Not the crisp, clean cold of an Idaho winter that wakes you up and makes your cheeks pink. This was a damp, stagnant cold. It seeped right through my clothes and settled into my bones. It smelled of wet cardboard, stale cigarette smoke, and something sharper underneath. It smelled like formaldehyde. It was the smell of preservation, the smell of things that are dead but are being kept from rotting naturally. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded flat. There was no echo. It was as if the walls just swallowed the sound instantly, stifling it before it could travel more than a few feet. It felt like speaking inside a padded box. I looked down at myself. I was still wearing the same clothes I had died in, my comfortable gray slacks and the blue floral blouse I had bought at the department store on sale. But they looked different here. In the living room, under the warm lamps, they had been clean and pressed. Here, in this harsh, buzzing light, they looked threadbare. They looked gray and dusty, as if I had been wearing them for 100 years without washing them. I brushed at my sleeve, trying to wipe away the dust, but it wasn't surface dirt. It was as if the fabric itself was decaying. I started to walk. I didn't know what else to do. There were no doors on either side of the corridor, just blank, bruised walls stretching on forever. I walked for what felt like 10 minutes, but could have been 10 hours. There was no sense of time passing here. There was only the sound of my own footsteps clicking against the loose tiles. Click, clack, click, clack. Fear began to rise in my chest, a cold sludge moving up my throat. This was a mistake. This had to be a mistake. Maybe I wasn't dead. Maybe I was in a coma, dreaming this terrible, boring dream. I pinched my arm, hard. I felt it. It hurt. I felt the pinch, sharp and real. The pain lingered, throbbing. This was not a dream. I tried to pray. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Jesus, please help me. Where am I?" Usually, when I prayed on earth, I felt a sense of comfort. I felt a warmth, or at least a sense of duty fulfilled. But here the name of Jesus felt like sand in my mouth. It felt dry and empty. The words fell from my lips and hit the floor like stones. There was no connection. The line was dead. That was when the real panic started. I stopped walking and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. The wall was slimy to the touch, covered in a thin film of condensation. I pulled my hand back in disgust, wiping it on my pants. "Is anyone there?" I screamed, losing my composure. "Someone help me! I'm Martha Stevens. I'm from Boise." Silence. Just the buzzing of the lights. I pushed myself off the wall and kept moving. I had to find an exit. I had to find a receptionist, a nurse, anyone. I walked faster, my sensible shoes clacking louder and louder. The corridor seemed to stretch and warp. the perspective shifting so that it looked endless. And then I saw it. Ahead of me, blocking the path, was a desk. It wasn't a heavenly gate. It wasn't a podium. It was a heavy, wooden executive desk, the kind you might see in a loan officer's office or a principal's room. It was dark mahogany, polished to a high shine that looked out of place against the peeling floor tiles. Behind the desk sat a figure. At first, from a distance, I was relieved. It was a person, a man. He was looking down, writing something. I slowed my pace, smoothing my hair, fixing my blouse. I took a deep breath, trying to summon the dignity I had carried all my life. I was Martha Stevens. I was a respectable woman. I would just explain that there had been a mix-up. I approached the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice trembling only slightly. "I think I'm lost. I'm looking for the entrance. I passed away just a moment ago." The man did not look up immediately. He was writing in a large, leather-bound ledger with a fountain pen. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was loud, like a claw dragging across dry wood. He finished the sentence he was writing, and then, with agonizing slowness, he capped the pen. He wore a suit. It was a dark charcoal gray, tailored impeccably. It fit him so perfectly, it looked like a second skin. His shirt was white, stark and blinding, and his tie was a deep blood red. He looked professional. He looked efficient. Then he raised his head. He looked like a man of about 40. He was handsome, in a generic, forgettable way. He had slicked back dark hair and a clean-shaven face. But his eyes stopped the breath in my throat. They were flat. There is no other way to say it. Human eyes have depth. They have light and shadow. His eyes were like matte paint. They were dark brown, but they absorbed everything. There was no spark of life, no soul behind them. It was like looking at a doll or a corpse that had been animated by something cold and mathematical. He smiled. It was a tight, practiced motion that exposed his teeth. His teeth were perfectly straight, perfectly white, and just slightly too small for his mouth. "Martha," he said. He knew my name. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. It sounded like a radio announcer reading a list of fatalities. "You are not lost, my dear. We have been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" I repeated. The words felt heavy on my tongue, like I was trying to speak with a mouthful of cotton. I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk to steady myself. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, sucking the heat right out of my fingertips. "I don't understand. Is this the intake for heaven? Is there some paperwork I need to sign?" The man chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound, like sandpaper sliding over stone. He didn't look up from his ledger immediately. He ran a long, pale finger down the column of names, his nail clicking against the paper with a sharp, rhythmic tap. "Heaven," he said, saying the word as if it were a joke he didn't find particularly funny. "That is a very popular destination request. Everyone assumes they have a reservation there. It is fascinating, really. Even the ones who arrive with blood on their hands expect to see the pearly gates. But you, Martha, you are different." He finally looked up again, locking those flat, dead eyes onto mine. "You didn't bring blood. You brought something much more refined. You brought order. You brought cleanliness." I felt a surge of pride mixed with the terror. My chest puffed out slightly, an automatic reflex I had honed over 40 years of being the most respectable woman on my block. "Yes," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "I was always faithful. I never missed a Sunday service in 40 years. I was the treasurer for the ladies' auxiliary. I kept my house spotless. I raised my son to be polite." "Punctuality," the man interrupted, nodding appreciatively. "That was always one of your greatest virtues, wasn't it? You were never late. Not for church, not for work, not for the bus route. You despised people who were late. You found it disrespectful." It is disrespectful, I said, feeling like I was finally on firm ground. This was a conversation I knew how to have. It shows a lack of character. If you can't manage your time, you can't manage your soul. That's what I always told Earl. Precisely, the man smiled again, and this time I saw the skin around his eyes crinkle, but the eyes themselves remained two black voids. And that is why everything here is prepared for you. We value order here, Martha. We value the meticulous record-keeping of every single transaction. He turned the ledger around so I could see it. I leaned forward, expecting to see a list of my good deeds. I expected to see the casseroles I baked for the homeless shelter. I expected to see the tithe checks I wrote every month, down to the penny. But the page was not filled with numbers. It was filled with quotes. I squinted, trying to read the elegant, flowing script. She looks ridiculous in that dress. Who does she think she is fooling? May 14th, 1998. He says he's depressed, but he's just lazy. If he worked harder, he wouldn't have time to be sad. August 3rd, 2005. God is punishing her for her divorce. She deserves to be alone. December 24th, 2011. I recoiled as if the book had burned me. What is this? I gasped. These are just thoughts. These aren't things I did. These are just things I thought in my head. The man's smile widened, stretching too far across his face. Thoughts? He whispered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. Martha, my dear, in this realm, thoughts are not wisps of smoke. They are bricks, and you have built a cathedral. He stood up. He was taller than he looked sitting down. He towered over me, blocking the flickering light from the hallway. His suit didn't wrinkle as he moved. He walked around the desk with a fluid predator grace, coming to stand right next to me. I could smell him now. Under the expensive cologne, there was the smell of old blood and singed hair. You see, he continued, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch was freezing. You thought that because you didn't drink, didn't smoke, and didn't sleep around, you were holy. You watched those Christian testimonies on television, the ones about drug addicts and criminals finding Jesus, and you turned your nose up. You thought, I am better than them. I don't need saving because I never fell. I trembled under his hand. I was a good woman, I insisted, but my voice was thin, cracking like dry ice. I didn't hurt anyone. Didn't you? He leaned down, his face inches from mine. What about your sister, Sarah? The name hung in the stagnant air between us. I prayed for Sarah, I stammered. You prayed that she would learn a lesson, he corrected. You prayed that she would hit rock bottom, so you could be the one to pick her up and say, I told you so. You didn't want her restoration, Martha. You wanted her humiliation. You wanted her to fail, so your success would look brighter by comparison. He stepped back, gesturing to the ledger. We have it all recorded. Every silent judgment, every smug look. Every time you walked past a beggar and thanked God you weren't like him, not out of gratitude, but out of pride. You kept your hands clean, yes. But your heart was a murder weapon. I stared at him, horror dawning on me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a clerical error. Where am I? I whispered. This isn't heaven. The man laughed. It wasn't a demonic roar. It was a polite, dismissive laugh, like a banker denying a loan application. Heaven? No, Martha. Heaven is for people who know they are sick. Heaven is for people who know they need a doctor. You were the healthy one. You were the righteous one. You didn't need grace, did you? You had your rules. He turned and pointed down the hallway, past the desk. For the first time, I noticed a set of massive double doors at the very end of the corridor. They were made of dark, polished wood, bound with brass handles that gleamed in the dim light. Above the doors, there was a sign, small and tasteful, like you might see in a theater. Go on, he said, his voice returning to that smooth, professional tone. Your seat is waiting. We saved the best spot for you. front and center. "I don't want to go," I cried, tears finally spilling over. "I want to see my mother. I want to see Jesus. Please, I made a mistake. I can change." The man shook his head slowly. "Change requires admitting you were wrong. And you, Martha Stevens, have never admitted you were wrong in your entire life. Why start now?" He sat back down at his desk, picked up his fountain pen, and uncapped it with that same sharp click. He returned his attention to the ledger, dismissing me completely. "Proceed to the auditorium. The performance is about to begin, and you are the star." I stood there for a moment, paralyzed. I wanted to run back the way I came, but looking back down the corridor, the darkness seemed to have swallowed the path. There was only the desk, the man, and the doors ahead. I had no choice. I began to walk toward the doors. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through deep water. The air grew warmer as I approached the end of the hall. The smell of formaldehyde faded, replaced by something else. It was a smell I recognized from my childhood. It smelled like a heater that had been turned on for the first time in winter, the smell of burning dust. But it was stronger. It was the smell of scorching fabric. When I reached the double doors, I hesitated. I could feel heat radiating through the wood, vibrating against my palms. I didn't want to open them. Every instinct in my spirit was screaming at me to run, to hide, to drop to my knees and beg. But my body moved on its own. It was the habit of obedience. I had always done what I was told. I had always gone where I was directed. I pushed the doors open. They swung inward with a heavy, oiled silence. I stepped through the threshold, and the doors slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I was standing at the top of a massive auditorium. It was cavernous, the ceiling lost in shadows high above. The walls were draped in heavy curtains that looked black in the gloom. The floor sloped down steeply toward a stage that was empty and dark, but it was the seating that froze the blood in my veins. Rows and rows of theater seats, thousands of them. They were beautiful, antique seats with red velvet upholstery and dark wood armrests. They stretched out into the darkness, a sea of red and black. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the dim light. I expected to see a crowd. I expected to see thousands of other souls. I expected noise. But the auditorium was silent, and it was almost entirely empty. It wasn't empty in the way a room is empty before an event starts. It was empty in a way that felt deliberate. It felt abandoned. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I looked at the seats as I passed. Each one had a small brass plate on the back, etched with a name. I saw names I recognized, names of people from my town, names of people from my church. Robert Jenkins, the man who ran the liquor store. I had always crossed the street to avoid him. I had told the ladies at the prayer circle that he was a stain on the community. His seat was empty. The velvet was smooth, untouched. Linda Myers, the woman who left her husband for a younger man. I had stopped speaking to her in the grocery store. I had called her a harlot in my heart. Her seat was empty. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I walked faster, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. David Stevens, my son. I stopped. I grabbed the back of the chair, my knuckles turning white. David, my beautiful, rebellious boy. He had started smoking weed at 16. He had been arrested twice. He had stopped coming to Christmas dinner 3 years ago because he said I was too judgmental. I had cried tears of anger over him. I had told Earl that David was choosing the path to destruction. I had accepted, in the dark corners of my mind, that my son was going to hell. I had even prepared myself for it, thinking that his punishment would vindicate my warnings. I looked at his chair. It was empty. There was no one sitting there. There was no torture. There was no suffering David. He wasn't here. No, I whispered. He belongs here. He was a sinner. He didn't follow the rules. I looked at the seat next to it. Sarah, my sister, the chaotic, emotional mess of a woman. Her seat was empty. I spun around, looking frantically at the rows behind me, the rows in front of me. Thousands of seats, thousands of names of people I had known, people I had categorized, people I had mentally placed in this very room. They were all empty. The realization hit me like a physical slap. They weren't here. The liquor store owner, the adulteress, the addict, the failure, they weren't here. Which meant they were somewhere else. Which meant they had found mercy. Which meant God had looked at their messy, broken lives and seen something I had refused to see. He had seen their hearts. He had seen their repentance. And I stood there, the only person in the aisle. "Where is everyone?" I screamed, my voice cracking. "I followed the rules. I did everything right." I stumbled forward, my legs shaking so hard I could barely stand. I fell toward a row near the front. I grabbed a chair to steady myself. I looked at the nameplate. Martha Stevens. It was polished to a high shine. It was the only chair in the entire row that looked like it was waiting for someone. It was the only chair that felt hungry. I looked around the vast, empty room again. There were a few other figures, separated by hundreds of seats. A man far off to the right, sitting alone, staring at his knees. A woman way up in the balcony, her head in her hands. We were miles apart. There was no community here. There was no shared suffering. There was only isolation. I realized then what this place was. The usher had said I brought order. He had said I brought judgment. This was the gallery of the self-righteous. This was the theater for the people who thought they were the audience, not the participants. I had spent my life watching others, critiquing their performances, waiting for them to fail, and now I had the best seat in the house. I looked at the empty seat of my son again. The emptiness of it hurt more than fire. It meant he was safe. It meant I was wrong. It meant that while I was busy judging his sin, he was busy finding God's grace. And while I was busy polishing my exterior, I was rotting on the inside. I sank into my chair. I didn't want to sit, but the weight of the atmosphere forced me down. The moment my body touched the velvet, the chair seemed to mold around me. It wasn't sticky, but it felt possessive. It felt like it had been shaped exactly for my spine. And then, the silence broke. It started as a low hum coming from the floorboards. Then the heat began. It wasn't a flame, it was a radiation. It came from the chair itself. It started at the base of my spine and began to crawl up, hot and terrifyingly intimate. I tried to stand up, but I couldn't move. I wasn't tied down, there were no chains, but I was pinned by a force heavier than gravity. I was pinned by my own history. If this story is speaking to you, if something inside your heart is stirring, stay with me and take a moment to subscribe here to the channel. This is not just a video. This is an encounter with God. The heat did not come from a furnace. That is the first thing I need you to understand. When you hear about the fires of hell, you imagine a landscape of burning sulfur, vast lakes of lava that consume everything in their path. But the heat that began to rise in that auditorium was different. It was intimate. It was personal. It was radiating from the very chair I sat in, and worse, it was radiating from inside my own chest. I tried to stand. I pushed down on the velvet armrests with all the strength I had left in my 62-year-old arms. I wanted to scream, to run back up the aisle, to pound on those heavy wooden doors until my knuckles bled. But I could not move. There were no straps binding my wrists. There were no iron shackles around my ankles. The force that held me there was invisible, but it was heavier than lead. It felt like gravity had increased tenfold, but only for me. It was a crushing, suffocating weight that pressed my shoulders back against the chair, pinning me to the spot where my name was etched in brass. And then, the stage lights turned on. They were not the warm, welcoming lights of a church sanctuary. They were harsh, clinical spotlights, the kind used in an interrogation room or a surgical theater. They flooded the empty stage with a blinding white glare, illuminating dust motes that hung in the stagnant air like suspended ash. The usher walked out from the wings. He moved with that same fluid, predatory grace I had seen in the corridor. He walked to the center of the stage, his polished shoes making no sound on the floorboards. He adjusted his cuffs, smoothed his tie, and looked out into the cavernous, empty darkness of the auditorium. He looked directly at me. He didn't need a microphone. When he spoke, his voice seemed to originate from right beside my ear, whispering directly into my auditory nerve. "Welcome," he said, spreading his arms in a gesture of mock hospitality. "We are so pleased you could join us for the evening service. We have a very special program prepared, dedicated entirely to the life and works of Martha Stevens." I wanted to shout at him to stop, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. My throat felt dry, parched, as if I had swallowed a handful of sand. "You are confused," the usher said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You are wondering why you are stuck. You are wondering why it is getting so warm." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, peering down into the gloom where I sat paralyzed. "You see, Martha, in your world, you believed that sin was an action. You believed that sin was something you did with your hands or your body. You thought that because you never stole, never killed, never committed adultery, you were clean." He paused, and the silence in the room felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. "But here," he continued, his voice dropping to a hiss, "we know the truth. We know that the tongue is a match, and the mind is a factory. You are not bound by chains, Martha. You are bound by the weight of everything you left unsaid to people's faces, but screamed in the privacy of your own heart." As he spoke, the heat in the chair intensified. It wasn't just warm anymore, it was hot. It felt like the upholstery was filled with boiling water. But the strangest, most terrifying part was that the heat was concentrating in my throat. It started as a tickle, a scratchiness like the beginning of a cold. Then it grew. It felt like I had swallowed a hot coal. The burning sensation expanded, moving up into my jaw and down into my chest. It was a searing, sharp pain that made my eyes water, but I couldn't cough. I couldn't expel it. "Do you feel that?" the usher asked softly. "That is the accumulation of 62 years of judgment. Every time you smiled at a neighbor but thought they were trash, that was a coal. Every time you hugged your sister but thought she was a failure, that was a coal. Every time you sat in the pew and thanked God you weren't like the sinner next to you, that was a coal." He snapped his fingers, and a large screen descended behind him. It wasn't a movie screen. It looked more like a giant mirror, but the reflection was twisted. The screen flickered to life. I saw a kitchen. My kitchen. It was pristine, the counters gleaming, the floor mopped. I saw myself standing by the phone. I looked younger, maybe in my 40s. I was holding the receiver, listening. I recognized the moment instantly. It was a memory I had buried decades ago. It was the day my best friend Alice had called me to tell me her husband had left her. She was sobbing, broken, asking for comfort. On the screen, I saw myself listening. I saw my face. It was composed, calm. I was saying all the right things. "I'm so sorry, Alice. That's terrible. I'm here for you." But then the screen changed. It didn't show the outside world anymore. It showed the inside of my chest. It showed my heart, and what I saw made me want to vomit. My heart didn't look like flesh. It looked like a knot of vipers. As I spoke those comforting words to Alice, the vipers were striking. I could see the thoughts forming in my heart, scrolling across the screen like subtitles, but they were written in fire. I knew this would happen. She never kept a clean house. She let herself go. She drove him away. The words on the screen were bright, burning red. And as I read them, the pain in my throat exploded. It felt like someone had poured acid down my esophagus. I gagged, my body convulsing against the chair, but I couldn't look away. "You see," the usher said, pointing at the screen. "You were comforting her with your mouth, but you were murdering her with your mind. You were enjoying her pain, Martha. You were drinking it up like fine wine because it made you feel superior. It made you feel safe." The scene changed. I saw my son, David. He was a teenager, standing in the doorway, smelling of cigarettes, his eyes red. He was trying to apologize for coming home late. On the screen, I saw myself sigh. I saw the look of disappointment I plastered on my face, a look I had practiced, a look I knew would cut him deeper than any scream. I said nothing. I just turned my back and walked to the sink to wash dishes. But on the screen, the subtitles returned. "He is a waste. He is broken. He will never amount to anything. He is an embarrassment to this family." The heat in my throat became unbearable. It felt like my vocal cords were carbonizing. I clawed at my neck, my fingernails digging into my skin, but the burning was on the inside. It was the physical manifestation of the curse I had spoken over my own child. "You killed him," the usher whispered. "You didn't use a gun. You didn't use a knife. You used your silence. You used your expectations. You crushed his spirit until he believed he was exactly what you thought he was, worthless." "I loved him," I tried to scream, but the words came out as a gargled, smoking croak. "I wanted him to be good." "You wanted him to make you look good," the usher corrected sharply. "There is a difference. Love is patient. Love is kind. Your love was a transaction. You loved him when he performed. You hated him when he struggled." He began to walk back and forth across the stage, his voice rising, filling the empty auditorium. "And that is why you are here, Martha. That is why the seat is hot. You are sitting in the furnace of your own self-righteousness. You spent a lifetime swallowing your toxicity, hiding it behind a polite smile and a Bible verse. You never let it out. You never confessed it. You never brought it into the light." He stopped and pointed a long finger at me. "So now it is going to consume you. It has nowhere else to go. You are going to digest every bitter thought, every judgmental glance, every moment of pride. You are going to eat the fruit of your own lies." The pain was blinding now. I felt like I was glowing from the inside out. My skin felt tight, as if it were about to split. The heat was radiating from my stomach, up my chest, filling my head. I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes. I looked at the empty seats around me. David's seat, Sarah's seat. The empty spaces mocked me. They were not here because they had poured themselves out. Sarah had screamed her pain to God. David had cried out in his addiction. They had been messy. They had been broken. But they had been honest. I had been a whited sepulchre, beautiful on the outside, full of dead men's bones on the inside. "Please," I wheezed, the sound barely audible. "Make it stop. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The usher paused. He tilted his head, listening. Then he smiled that terrible flat smile. "Sorry?" he asked. "Are you sorry, Martha, or are you just in pain?" He laughed, a sound that grated against my raw nerves. "There is a difference, you know. Regret is wishing you hadn't been caught. Repentance is wishing you hadn't done it. You are not repenting. You are bargaining. You are trying to find the loophole, just like you always did." He gestured to the screen again. A new image appeared. It was a church service. I was sitting in my usual spot, third row, left side. The pastor was giving an altar call. He was asking anyone who felt heavy-laden to come forward. I saw myself sitting there, rigid, clutching my purse. I saw the look on my face, a mask of pious concentration. But inside, the subtitles revealed the truth. I don't need to go down there. That's for the sinners. That's for the people who messed up their week. I am fine. I am holy. "You refused the medicine," the usher said softly. "Week after week, year after year, the physician was right there in the room with you. He was walking the aisles. He was touching hearts. But you put up a sign that said no entry. You told God you were full. You told him you didn't need anything. He leaned forward, his face suddenly serious, stripped of the mockery. And God is a gentleman, Martha. He respects your decision. You wanted to be full of yourself? You wanted to be full of your own righteousness? Fine. He gave you exactly what you asked for. You are full of it. And now it is burning you alive. The heat surged again, a fresh wave of agony. I felt something bubbling up in my throat, not vomit, but smoke. Actual gray smoke began to drift from my lips. I was burning from the inside. My soul was combusting. This is the torment of the Pharisee, the usher declared, his voice booming now. It is not the whip. It is not the rack. It is the truth. You are finally seeing yourself as you truly are, without the filter of your ego, without the cushion of your reputation. You are seeing the monster you fed in the dark. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the light, trying to shut out the screen, but the images were burned into my mind. I saw every face I had looked down on. I saw every person I had gossiped about. And I realized, with a clarity that cut deeper than any knife, that I had been the villain in my own story. I had thought I was the hero. I had thought I was the protagonist of a story about a good Christian woman in a wicked world. But I was the wicked world. I was the stone that the builders rejected, not because I was holy, but because I was too hard to be shaped. "Let me out!" I tried to scream, but only a dry hiss emerged. "There is no exit," the usher replied calmly. "You built this room, Martha. You built the walls with your stubbornness. You built the roof with your pride. You bolted the doors with your judgment. This is your house. You prepared a place for yourself, and now you must live in it." He turned his back on me and began to walk away, fading into the shadows of the stage. "Enjoy the show," he called back over his shoulder. "It plays on a loop, forever." The screen flickered. The memory of Alice started again. The memory of David started again. The loop began. And I sat there, pinned by the gravity of my own sin, my throat burning with the fire of 10,000 unspoken curses, watching the evidence of my wasted life play out in high definition. I was alone. I was right. And I was in hell. The loop continued. That is the nature of this specific torment. It does not allow you to look away, and it does not allow you to forget. In the world above, in the land of the living, we have the luxury of distraction. If a memory is too painful, we turn on the television. We call a friend. We eat. We sleep. We let time erode the sharp edges of our guilt until it becomes a smooth, manageable stone we can carry in our pockets without noticing. Here, there is no erosion. Every moment is as sharp as a fresh cut. I watched the scene with Alice play out for the 100th time. I watched my son turn away from me in the doorway for the 1,000th time. And with every repetition, the heat in my throat intensified. My skin felt like it was pulling tight against my bones, shrinking, drying out like old parchment left in the sun. I could smell my own flesh scorching, but it didn't smell like meat. It smelled like burning sugar, sickeningly sweet and cloying. It was the smell of the fake sweetness I had sprayed over my life to cover the rot underneath. Then the screen changed again. The usher did not reappear on stage, but his presence was there, a heavy, suffocating thickness in the air. The silence of the empty auditorium deepened, pressing against my eardrums until they popped. The image on the screen was different now. It was no longer my kitchen. It was no longer my living room. It was the church. My heart gave a violent lurch in my chest. This was my sanctuary. This was the First Baptist Church of Boise, the place where I had been baptized, married, and where I assumed I would be eulogized. This was my safe place. Surely there could be no condemnation here. Surely my service in the house of God was the one thing that remained untainted. I saw myself standing in the choir loft. I was wearing my blue robe with the gold sash. I looked dignified. My mouth was open, singing the high notes of "Great is thy faithfulness." I remembered that Sunday. It was Easter. The lilies were arranged in massive white explosions across the altar. I remembered feeling holy. I remembered closing my eyes and lifting my hands, feeling the music swell around me. But on the screen, the reality was stripped of its disguise. I watched myself singing, but no music came out of my mouth. Instead, a thick black sludge poured over my lips, dripping down my chin and staining the blue robe. It was viscous and vile, like crude oil mixed with sewage. I stared in horror. "No," I whispered, the words scraping my raw throat. "That isn't true. I sang beautifully. Everyone said so." Then the subtitles appeared, burning in that same accusation read, "Look at Mrs. Gable's hat. It looks like a bird's nest. She is just trying to get attention. And the pastor is droning on today. I hope he finishes by noon or the roast will dry out." The sludge on the screen poured faster. It wasn't a song of praise. It was a vomit of distraction and vanity. I wasn't worshiping God. I was worshiping my own performance. I was standing in the presence of the Almighty, and I was worrying about a pot roast and judging a woman's hat. The scene shifted. I was in the fellowship hall. It was the annual Thanksgiving food drive. This was my pride and joy. I organized it every year. I was the one who made the spreadsheets. I was the one who assigned the shifts. I was the one who made sure every box was packed perfectly. On the screen, I saw myself handing a box of food to a young mother. She looked tired, her clothes worn. I remembered this moment. I remembered smiling at her and saying, "God bless you, dear." I remembered feeling a warm glow in my chest, a feeling of benevolence. But the screen showed the spiritual truth. As I handed her the box, I wasn't handing her cans of soup or boxes of pasta. I was handing her a pile of rotting gray fruit. The apples were collapsed in on themselves, oozing brown liquid. The bread was covered in green fuzz. Maggots were writhing in the grain. The box was filled with decay. The young mother took it, unaware, but I saw the truth. "Why?" I cried out, my voice breaking. "I gave good food. I bought it with my own money. I checked the expiration dates." The usher's voice floated out of the darkness, not from the stage, but from the empty seat right next to me. "You gave the food," he whispered, "but you kept the dignity. You looked at her and thought, if she worked as hard as I do, she wouldn't need this. You gave her charity, Martha, but you stripped her of her worth. You fed her body, but you poisoned her spirit with your condescension. To God, a gift given without love is not a gift. It is garbage. It is rot." I watched as the rotting fruit spilled out of the box on the screen, staining the woman's hands. I saw the look of triumph on my face in the video. Not the triumph of love, but the triumph of power. I enjoyed being the giver because it meant I wasn't the beggar. I enjoyed the hierarchy. The scene changed again. I was sitting in the pew. The offering plate was coming down the row. I had my checkbook ready. I always wrote a check. I never put in loose cash. I wanted a record. I wanted the tax deduction, yes, but I also wanted the treasurer to see my name. I wanted the church to know that Martha Stevens was a pillar. I saw myself drop the envelope into the brass plate, but as the envelope touched the velvet lining of the plate, it dissolved. It turned into a snake. It was a small, venomous viper, green and black. It uncoiled instantly and slithered into the pile of other envelopes. Then I saw other snakes appearing, not from everyone, but from me. Every time I gave, every time I volunteered, every time I served on a committee, I was releasing these vipers into the church. They weren't biting the pastor, they were biting the ankles of the weak. They were biting the newcomers. They were biting the people who didn't dress right, the people who didn't know the hymns, the people who smelled like cigarettes. My service was driving people away. My holiness was a barrier that kept the broken out of the hospital. "You thought you were the mortar holding the church together," the usher said, his voice hard and cold. "But you were the poison in the well. You were the reason the pews were empty, Martha. People came looking for Jesus, and they found you. They found your rules, they found your judgment, and they left. They chose the world because at least the world is honest about its cruelty. The pain in my body shifted. The heat in my throat subsided, replaced by a terrible itching sensation all over my skin. I looked down at my hands. They were blistering. Great, watery blisters were rising on my knuckles, on the backs of my hands. They were bubbling up, filled not with clear fluid, but with something dark and cloudy. I watched in horror as one of the blisters on my left hand popped. A thick, gray liquid oozed out. It didn't smell like infection. It smelled like expensive perfume. It smelled like the floral scent I had worn every day for 30 years. It was the most nausea-inducing smell I have ever encountered. It was the scent of corruption masked by beauty. "This is you," the voice beside me whispered. "This is your soul turning inside out. You spent a lifetime polishing the exterior, making sure the paint was fresh, making sure the lawn was mowed. But you never checked the foundation. You never checked the plumbing. You are leaking, Martha. The vessel is cracked." I grabbed my arms, trying to hold my skin together, trying to stop the blistering, but it was spreading up my wrists, up my forearms. My perfectly ironed blouse was soaking through with the perfume-scented pus of my own pride. "I didn't know," I wailed. "I thought I was doing right. I followed the manual." "You followed the rules," the usher corrected. "You never knew the author. You treated the Bible like a rule book for a club you wanted to be president of. You never read it as a love letter to a dying world. You never read it as a mirror for your own face." The screen went dark. The spotlight on the stage cut out. For a moment, there was total, absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that has weight. I couldn't see my hands. I couldn't see the blisters. I could only smell the perfume and feel the burning chair beneath me. Then, a new sound began. It wasn't the usher. It wasn't the screen. It was a vibration. It started in the floor, a low rumble that shook the teeth in my head. It grew louder, rising in pitch until it was a hum, then a whine, then a scream. But it wasn't a human scream. It was the scream of the empty seats. The thousands of chairs around me, the chairs that should have been filled with the people I had pushed away, the people I had failed to love, the people I had judged, began to vibrate. They were crying out. The sound was unbearable. It was a chorus of accusation. It was the sound of missed opportunities. It was the sound of every "I love you" I had withheld. It was the sound of every "I'm sorry" I had swallowed. I covered my ears, but the sound went right through my hands. It vibrated in my bones. "Why didn't you tell me?" The chairs seemed to scream. "Why did you look at me with disgust? Why did you think you were better?" The isolation was no longer silent. It was deafening. I was alone in a crowd of invisible victims, and their absence was louder than any presence could be. I curled into a ball in my burning chair, sobbing dry, tearless sobs. My goodness had been stripped away. My righteousness lay in puddles of perfumed filth on the floor. I had nothing left, no defenses, no arguments, no resume of good works. I was naked in the dark, and for the first time in 62 years, I wasn't Martha Stevens, the respected church lady. I was just a sinner. And I was terrified that it was too late to be anything else. The vibration of the empty seats did not stop. It grew until it was no longer just a sound or a sensation in the floorboards. It became a physical pressure, crushing the air out of the room. The silence of the missing people, the son I judged, the sister I condemned, the neighbors I ignored, coalesced into a weight that pressed down on my shoulders like a collapsed roof. I curled tighter into the fetal position on the burning velvet chair, my hands covering my ears, but the noise was inside my head. It was the roar of missed chances. It was the deafening volume of love withheld. In that darkness, stripped of my pride and covered in the blistering evidence of my own corruption, I tried to do the one thing that had always been my defense mechanism. I tried to use scripture. I tried to summon the Bible verses I had memorized for gold stars in Sunday school, the verses I had quoted to Earl when he was discouraged, the verses I had written in sympathy cards with perfect penmanship. I opened my mouth to whisper Psalm 23. I thought it would be a shield. I thought it would force the darkness back. "The Lord is my shepherd," I rasped. But the words did not bring comfort. As they left my lips, they turned into actual fire. It wasn't the heat of the chair or the burning of the blisters. This was a white-hot sear that scorched my tongue. I choked, gasping for air, but I kept trying. I shall not want. The pain was blinding. It felt like I was chewing on broken glass dipped in acid. I spat the words out, coughing up smoke. "Why?" I screamed mentally. "Those are your words. Why do they hurt me?" The answer didn't come from the usher. It came from inside my own understanding, a sudden, terrifying clarity that pierced through the pain. The Word of God is a sword. That is what the preacher always said. It is a double-edged sword. For 60 years, I had held that sword by the handle. I had pointed it at everyone else. I had used it to cut down my son's arguments. I had used it to slash at my sister's lifestyle. I had used it to prune the behavior of everyone around me until they fit my standards. But I had never let the sword cut me. I had never let it pierce my own heart. I had never let it trim away my pride or my arrogance. And now, here in the dark, the sword was turned. I was finally falling onto the blade I had sharpened for others. "He leadeth me beside the still waters," I tried to say, but the memory of the verse brought a vision of the waters I had poisoned. I saw the times I had stirred up drama in the church prayer chain, disguising gossip as prayer requests. I saw the times I had disturbed the peace of my own home with my constant nagging and criticism. I hadn't led anyone to still waters. I had led them to storm-tossed seas of judgment and then blamed them for drowning. I stopped trying to speak. The Bible could not save me because I had weaponized it. I had turned the bread of life into a stone to throw at sinners. The heat in the chair surged again, fusing the fabric of my slacks to my skin. I felt like I was melting into the furniture. I was becoming part of the auditorium. I realized with a jolt of horror that this was my eternal function. I was to be a fixture in the hall of judgment. I would sit here forever, a monument to the Pharisee, burning with the knowledge of what I could have been. A spotlight clicked on again, but this time it didn't hit the stage. It hit me. It was a narrow, vertical beam of pure, unforgiving light. It illuminated me in my chair, the blisters, the gray clothes, the smoke rising from my skin. I felt exposed in a way that is impossible to describe to the living. On earth, we are never truly naked. We have our clothes, our skin, our expressions, our reputations. Even naked, we can hide behind a smile or a lie. Here, the light went through the skin. It illuminated the marrow. It showed the cancer of pride wrapped around my spirit like a suffocating vine. The usher stepped into the edge of the light. He didn't look like a man anymore. The facade of the polite bureaucrat was fading. His suit seemed to ripple, revealing something ancient and jagged underneath. His eyes were no longer just flat, they were hungry. "You are beginning to understand," he said. His voice was no longer a whisper. It was a vibration that matched the screaming of the seats. "You thought you were a sheep, Martha. You thought you were part of the flock." He leaned in, his face shifting, stretching. "But you were never a sheep. You were a goat. You were a wolf in wool. You ate the sheep. You scattered them. You bit them to make them move where you wanted them to go. And now you are in the pen you built." He pointed a clawed hand at the empty seat of my son. "David is not here because he knew he was broken," the demon hissed. "He cried out to God in the gutter. He knew he was filth, and because he knew he was filth, God could wash him." He pointed at me. "You thought you were gold. How can God wash gold? You can only polish it. And you polished yourself until you were blinding, but underneath, you are hollow." The truth of it broke my spine. I slumped forward, my forehead touching the burning velvet of the chair in front of me. He was right. That was the torture. The devil wasn't lying to me. He was telling me the absolute, unvarnished truth, and the truth was burning me alive. I had no defense. I had no argument. I couldn't say, but I tried. I hadn't tried to love. I had tried to control. I couldn't say, but I believed. I hadn't believed in a savior. I had believed in a system. I had believed in a code of conduct that made me feel safe and superior. I was the elder brother in the parable of the prodigal son. I was the one who stayed home, who did the work, who followed the rules, and who stood outside the party with arms crossed, furious that the father would dare to forgive the one who wasted his inheritance. I had spent my life standing outside the party of grace, refusing to go in because I didn't want to rub shoulders with the sinners. And now the door was shut. The party was inside, with David, with Sarah, with the thief on the cross. And I was outside. I was in the outer darkness. The realization shattered the last remnant of my church lady persona. Martha Stevens, the treasurer, the choir member, the perfect wife, died in that chair. She evaporated like steam. All that was left was a terrified, naked soul who realized she had been serving the wrong master for 62 years. I hadn't been serving God. I had been serving my own ego. I had built a shrine to myself and called it Christianity. The pain became secondary to the grief. A wail rose up in my chest, a sound deeper than the burning throat, deeper than the smoke. It was the sound of a heart breaking under the weight of absolute regret. I am the sinner, I whispered into the velvet. The vibrating seats seemed to pause. I am the one who was wrong, I cried louder. Not David, not Sarah, me. It was me. I am the wicked one. The confession tasted like blood in my mouth, but it also tasted like air. For the first time since I arrived in this gray hell, I felt a tiny current of movement. I have nothing, I screamed, lifting my head into the blinding light. I have no good works. My works are filth. I have no righteousness. I am empty. I am a wretch. The usher recoiled. For the first time, the predator looked unsure. The light flickering around him seemed to destabilize. He didn't like this. He liked the arguments. He liked the justifications. He liked it when I tried to defend myself, but he didn't know what to do with a surrender. Stop that, he snarled, his voice losing its smooth texture. There is no point in that here. It is too late. You are finished. I am nothing, I shrieked, ignoring him. I wasn't talking to him anymore. I was talking to the ceiling. I was talking to the darkness beyond the roof. I am a whitewashed tomb. I am a brood of vipers. I am the one who nailed you to the cross. The heat in the chair spiked to an impossible temperature. It felt like the universe was trying to incinerate me to silence me. The demon stepped forward, his hand raising as if to strike me, to crush me into silence. But I didn't care about the pain anymore. I didn't care about the dignity. I didn't care about the rules. I knew, with a desperate, frantic certainty, that I had one chance. I had to smash the vessel. I had to break the clay pot so the light could get in. I threw my head back, exposing my burning throat to the spotlight. I didn't pray a pretty prayer. I didn't use King James English. I didn't worry about how I sounded. I screamed the only name that mattered. I screamed it with the desperation of a woman drowning in concrete. Jesus! The name hit the air like a physical shockwave. The usher shrieked, a high, piercing sound of pain, and covered his ears. The empty seats rattled violently, as if an earthquake had struck the foundation of the theater. The spotlight shattered. Save me from myself, I screamed into the exploding dark. Not from the fire. Save me from me. I didn't ask to be saved from hell. I asked to be saved from the sin that had brought me there. I didn't ask for relief. I asked for change. I surrendered the one thing I had held on to for 62 years, my right to be right. And in the echo of that scream, the auditorium began to collapse. The collapse of the auditorium was not like a building falling down in an earthquake. It was like a painting being dissolved by acid. The moment the name of Jesus left my lips, the reality of that place simply could not sustain itself. The lie cannot exist in the presence of the truth. The darkness cannot negotiate with the light. The usher, the man who had looked so polished, so in control, so terrifyingly bureaucratic, did not argue. He did not lunge at me. He shattered. It was as if he were made of glass and someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. His suit, his desk, his ledger of my sins, his flat, dead eyes, they all fragmented into a million shards of gray dust. He didn't scream in anger. He screamed in agony. The sound of that name was torture to him. It was a frequency that his existence could not endure. I watched him dissolve, blown away by a wind that I couldn't feel but could certainly see. The heavy velvet curtains tore down the middle. The rows of empty seats, the monuments to my isolation, began to buckle and twist like burning plastic. But I was still in the chair. The fire in the upholstery was raging now, consuming the Martha I had been. And this is the part that is hardest to explain, the part that makes me weep when I sit on my porch in the mornings with my Bible. I felt a separation. It was a physical tearing sensation, more painful than the aneurysm, more painful than the burning throat. I felt like I was being ripped in two. I looked down at myself. I saw my gray slacks. I saw my floral blouse. I saw the blisters on my hands. I saw the body of the woman who judged her neighbors. I saw the woman who ignored her son. I saw the woman who was proud, bitter, and cold. That woman, the old Martha, stayed in the chair. I saw her. I saw myself, sitting there, frozen in a rictus of judgment, fused to the seat of scorn. She belonged there. She was part of the furniture of hell. She was the shell I had constructed, the heavy, suffocating armor of self-righteousness. But I, the spirit, the breath, the desperate cry for mercy, was being pulled out of her. It felt like being skinned alive, but in reverse. I was being pulled out of the rot. I was being extracted from the disease. A hand grabbed me. It didn't come from the ceiling. It reached right into the middle of the fire. It didn't care about the heat. It didn't care about the filth. It grabbed me by the wrist. I looked at the hand. It wasn't manicured. It wasn't soft. It was rough. It was a worker's hand. It was strong, terrifyingly strong. And right in the center of the wrist, where the lifeblood flows, there was a scar. A jagged, deep, ancient scar. I knew that hand. I had sung about it. I had read about it. I had hung pictures of it on my wall. But I had never known the strength of it until it pulled me out of the pit. "I have you," a voice said. It wasn't a voice of thunder. It wasn't the booming voice of a movie god. It was a voice that sounded like rushing water. It was absolute, unshakable authority, wrapped in absolute, unshakable love. "You are mine," the voice said, "not because you are good, but because you called." The pull was violent. I was yanked upward, away from the burning chair, away from the disintegrating auditorium. I looked back one last time. I saw the old Martha, the shell of my pride, burning in the darkness. I saw the ledger of my sins turning to ash. I saw the empty seats of my family, and I realized with a burst of joy that they were empty because I was finally leaving them empty too. I wasn't going to stay there. I wasn't going to fill the seat reserved for the hypocrite. The darkness vanished. I wasn't in clouds. I was in a wind tunnel of light. It was moving so fast it blurred my vision. The silence of hell was replaced by a sound that I can only describe as a roar of life. It sounded like a million rivers crashing together. It sounded like the heartbeat of the universe. But the transition was not peaceful. It was a shock to the system. I had been dead. I had been cold. I had been rotting. Now life was being forced back into me. Have you ever had a limb fall asleep so completely that it feels like dead wood? And then, when the blood rushes back in, it hurts? It stings. It prickles. It is an exquisite, sharp pain of reawakening. Imagine that sensation, but over your entire soul. I felt the blood of the Spirit rushing back into places I had cut off for decades. I felt compassion returning, and it hurt like a burn. I felt humility returning, and it felt like my bones were being broken and reset. I felt love returning, not the polite, transactional love I had known, but a wild, dangerous love that demands everything. I was being defibrillated, not just my body, but my spirit. Thump. The first beat hit me like a cannonball. I gasped, but I didn't have lungs yet. I was still in the tunnel. Thump. The second beat was louder. The light was getting brighter, so bright it ceased to be white and became something else. A color I can't name, a color that is the source of all other colors. Go back, the voice whispered. Go back and fill the seats with love. Go back and tell them that the reservations can be canceled. Thump. The third beat shattered the spiritual realm. The sensation of the rough hand on my wrist vanished, replaced by the sensation of something hard slamming into my chest. Cold. Freezing, biting cold. The smell of ozone, the smell of antiseptic, the smell of fear. My eyes flew open. I wasn't in the auditorium. I wasn't in the tunnel. I was staring at a blindingly bright ceiling tile with a water stain in the corner. A face was hovering over me, covered in a blue mask, eyes wide with panic and focus. "Clear!" someone shouted. My body arched off the table. The electricity coursed through me, a pale imitation of the power that had just pulled me out of hell, but enough to restart the biological machine. I slammed back down onto the mattress. Air. I needed air. I sucked in a breath. It was the most painful, most beautiful thing I have ever tasted. It tasted like rubber and oxygen and life. It tasted like a second chance. "We have a rhythm," a voice shouted. "She's back. We have a pulse." I tried to speak, but my throat, my physical throat, was raw. I started to cough. It was a violent, racking cough that shook the gurney. I turned my head to the side and retched, my body trying to expel the memory of the smoke, the memory of the poison I had swallowed for 60 years. "Easy, Mrs. Stevens, easy," a nurse was saying, her hands holding my shoulders down. "You had an aneurysm. You went into cardiac arrest. We lost you for 4 minutes, but you're here. You're back." 4 minutes. I looked at the clock on the wall. The red numbers blinked. 4:12 p.m. I had been gone for 4 minutes, but I had lived an eternity. I had sat in that chair for a lifetime. I had watched the movie of my life on repeat until it broke me. I grabbed the nurse's arm. I gripped it hard, my fingers digging into her scrubs. I didn't care if I was hurting her. I didn't care about being polite. The Martha who worried about manners had burned up in the chair. "The seats," I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. "The seats are empty." "Shh, it's okay. It's just the medication," she said, trying to soothe me, trying to pry my fingers loose. "No!" I wheezed, tears streaming down my face, hot and real and cleansing. "You don't understand. The seats are empty because we aren't supposed to go there. Tell them. Tell David. Tell Sarah." "We will call your family," the doctor said, stepping into my line of sight. He looked tired. He looked like he had seen death 1,000 times. "Just rest, Martha. You're very lucky." Lucky. I closed my eyes. The darkness behind my eyelids was no longer the heavy, suffocating black of the corridor. It was just the natural darkness of rest. I wasn't lucky. Luck is for lottery tickets. Luck is for finding a parking spot. I was redeemed. I lay there listening to the beep of the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of time. Time that I had been given back. Time that I didn't deserve. I thought about the ledger. I thought about the usher. I thought about the pile of rotting fruit and the snakes in the offering plate. And then I thought about the hand with the scar. I began to weep. Not the polite, silent crying I used to do in church when the music was emotional. This was ugly crying. My chest heaved. I made noises that sounded like a wounded animal. The nurses looked uncomfortable. They adjusted my IVs, checked my vitals, exchanged worried glances. They thought I was in pain. They didn't know I was being washed. I was crying out the bitterness. I was crying out the judgment. I was crying out the 62 years of thinking I was better than everyone else. I was mourning the woman I had been, and I was thanking God that she was dead. If you are still here, listening to this testimony, I believe it is because God is knocking on the door of your heart right now. He is showing you the empty seats. He is showing you the danger of a hard heart. Before we reach the end of this journey, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you do not miss the rest of what God wants to show you. We are almost at the end, but the most important part is what happened next. I lay in that hospital bed for 3 weeks. The doctors were amazed at my recovery. They said the aneurysm should have left me paralyzed. They said the lack of oxygen should have caused brain damage. They called it a medical miracle. But the real miracle wasn't that my brain was working. The real miracle was that my heart was working. For the first time in my life, I didn't care about the stains on the ceiling tiles. I didn't care that the nurse's uniform was wrinkled. I didn't care that the food was bland. I looked at the nurse, the one I had grabbed, and I really saw her. I didn't see a servant. I didn't see an employee. I saw a woman with tired eyes and a wedding ring that was too loose. I saw a soul. "Thank you," I whispered to her one night when she came to check my blood pressure. "Thank you for saving me." She smiled, a tired, practiced smile. "It's my job, Mrs. Stevens." "No," I said, reaching out to touch her hand. My hand was still weak, but it didn't have spiritual blisters anymore. "I mean, thank you for being here. You are important. God sees you." Her smile faltered, and for a second, I saw the tears in her eyes. The old Martha would have offered a Bible verse and turned away. The new Martha just held her hand and let her cry. I knew then that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't go back to the clean house and the empty heart. I had a mission. I had to cancel the reservations. I had to make a phone call. I stared at the telephone on the hospital bedside table. It was a standard beige plastic phone, the kind you find in every hospital room in America. But to me, it looked like the heaviest object in the world. It weighed more than the auditorium chairs. It weighed more than my pride. I needed to call David. For 3 years, our conversations had been brief, cold, and transactional. I would call to remind him of a birthday or to ask if he was coming to Thanksgiving, already knowing the answer would be no. He would answer with a guarded tone, waiting for the criticism, waiting for the passive-aggressive comment about his job or his haircut. I picked up the receiver. My hand was shaking, not from the neurological aftershocks of the aneurysm, but from the terrifying vulnerability of what I was about to do. I dialed the number from memory. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" His voice was rough. He sounded tired. I could hear traffic in the background. "David?" I said. My voice broke on the first syllable. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. "Mom," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a burden. "Dad told me you had an episode. He said you were in the ICU. Are you okay?" I struggled to find the word. Was I okay? My body was weak. My head throbbed. But my spirit felt clean for the first time in decades. "I'm alive, David. I'm alive." "That's good," he said, and I could hear the awkwardness. He wanted to get off the phone. He expected me to tell him he should have been there. He expected me to guilt him. "David, please don't hang up," I said, the urgency rising in my chest. "I didn't call to tell you about the hospital. I called to tell you that I was wrong." The silence on the other end was absolute. The traffic noise seemed to fade. "Wrong about what?" he asked, suspicious. "Everything," I wept. The tears came freely now, hot and healing. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about me. I judged you, David. I looked at your life and I saw flaws, but I never looked at my own heart to see the rot. I am so sorry. I am so, so sorry." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Mom, are you on medication? Is this the morphine talking?" No, I said firmly. This is me. This is the mother who should have loved you better. I saw where I was headed, David, and I saw that you weren't there. You weren't in the seat of judgment. I was. You were safer than I was because you knew you needed help. I thought I was perfect. Mom, stop, he said, his voice cracking. I won't stop, I insisted. I love you, not the version of you that I wanted to show off at church. I love you, the real you, the messy you, the broken you, because I am broken too. We are the same, David. We both need grace. I heard a sound I hadn't heard since he was a little boy. I heard him sob. It was a single, choked sound of a wall coming down. I'm coming to the hospital, he said. Okay, I whispered. Come. When he walked into the room an hour later, he looked terrified. He stood in the doorway, clutching a baseball cap in his hands, looking at me like I was a stranger. And in a way, I was. The mother who had looked at him with disappointment was dead. She had burned up in the velvet chair. I held out my arms. He hesitated, then rushed forward. He buried his face in my shoulder, and we cried. We cried for the years we had wasted. We cried for the pain I had caused. But mostly we cried because the war was over. The Cold War of the Stevens household had ended, not with a treaty, but with a surrender. My surrender. Returning home a week later was the strangest experience of my life. Earl drove me back in our Buick. He was quiet, walking on eggshells, unsure of who this new woman was. He had spent 40 years with a wife who corrected his driving, who criticized his tie, who ran the house like a military barracks. Now, he sat next to a woman who looked out the window at the gray Idaho winter and smiled at the beauty of the bare trees. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same. The walkway was shoveled. The curtains were drawn. I walked inside. The smell of the house hit me, lemon polish and potpourri. It was the smell of my control. I walked into the living room. I saw the spot on the floor where I had fallen. I saw the laundry basket, still sitting there, the socks half folded. It was a crime scene. It was the place where the Pharisee had died. I sat down on the sofa. Earl hovered nervously by the door. Do you want me to put the kettle on? He asked. No, Earl, I said softly. Come sit with me. He sat down, stiffly, leaving a foot of space between us. I love you, Earl, I said, turning to look at him. I know I haven't been easy to live with. I know I made you feel small, so I could feel big. I am sorry. Earl stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He had waited a lifetime to hear those words. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers trembling. You really saw it, didn't you? He whispered. The hell you talked about in the hospital. I saw the empty seats, I told him. I saw the place prepared for the people who think they are good. And Earl, I don't want to go back. I don't want anyone to go there. The next Sunday, I went back to church. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Walking into that building felt like walking back into the scene of my indictment. I saw the pew where I used to sit. I saw the choir loft where I had sung my hollow songs. People came up to me, smiling, welcoming me back. Martha, you look wonderful. We prayed for you. Praise the Lord, you are healed. I looked at them, Mrs. Gable with her hats, the young mother with the noisy children, the man who smelled like cigarettes. Before, I would have scanned them for faults. I would have categorized them. Tacky hat, bad mother, sinner. Now, I looked at them and I felt a physical ache in my chest. It was love. It was a terrifying, overwhelming love. I saw them as fragile, precious souls walking on a tightrope. I saw them as people Jesus died for. I didn't go to my usual seat in the third row. I walked to the back. I sat next to a young man I didn't know, a boy with piercings in his eyebrows and a hoodie pulled up over his head. He looked uncomfortable, like he expected someone to tell him to leave. I sat down beside him. He flinched, waiting for the rebuke. I turned to him and smiled, not the church lady smile. A real smile. "I'm glad you're here," I said. "My name is Martha." He looked at me, shocked. I'm just checking it out. I'm not really religious." "That's okay," I said. "Neither am I. I'm just someone who needed to be rescued." He relaxed. We sat there together, the former Pharisee and the seeker, and for the first time in 62 years, I worshipped God in spirit and in truth. I didn't care if the music was too loud. I didn't care if the sermon was too long. I was just grateful to be in the house of the Lord and not in the auditorium of the damned. I started a new ministry in my heart. It wasn't an official committee. I didn't ask for a title. I just started loving the people I had hated. I called my sister Sarah. When she heard my voice, she was defensive, ready for the lecture about her latest divorce. Instead, I asked her how she was feeling. I listened. I didn't offer advice. I didn't quote a proverb. I just told her I loved her and that she was a survivor. We talked for 2 hours. She is coming to visit next month. My house is not as clean as it used to be. There is dust on the mantel sometimes. The dishes sometimes sit in the sink overnight if Earl and I are watching a movie or talking. And that is okay, because my ledger is clean. I burned the mental books I kept on everyone. I realized that keeping a record of wrongs is a heavy, burning weight that drags you down to the deepest parts of the pit. I let it go. I forgave everyone, not because they apologized, but because I had been forgiven a debt I could never pay. I want to speak to you now, to the person watching this. I know who watches these kinds of videos. I know because I was you. You are likely a believer. You go to church. You try to do what is right. You look at the world getting darker, and you think, thank God I am not like them. You look at the addicts, the criminals, the people who are lost, and you feel a sense of distance. You feel safe in your morality. I am here to tell you that your morality is a spiderweb. It cannot hold you when the fire comes. I saw the seats. I saw the rows and rows of empty chairs in hell reserved for the people we call sinners. They weren't there. Many of them had found the mercy of Jesus in the last moments of their broken lives. They had fallen on the rock and been broken, and so they were saved. But the seat for the righteous, the seat for the proud, the seat for the one who thinks they have earned their way, that seat was occupied. It was occupied by me. Do not let your seat be filled. Do not let your pride be the chain that binds you to the darkness. It is subtler than lust. It is quieter than violence, but it is deadlier than both. If you are holding a grudge against a family member, let it go. If you are looking down on someone in your church, stop. If you are serving God to be seen by men, repent. The usher is waiting. The ledger is open. He is counting every unspoken judgment, every moment of arrogance. But there is a hand that is stronger than the usher. There is a name that shatters the auditorium. Jesus. He is not looking for your perfection. He is looking for your heart. He wants the real you, the broken you, the you that is terrified you aren't enough. Give him that person. Smash the clay vessel. Let the light in. I am Martha Stevens. I was a Pharisee. I was a judge. I was dead in my pew. But I called his name, and he answered. He is listening for your voice right now. Do not wait until the aneurysm strikes. Do not wait until the screen descends. Do not wait until the heat rises in the chair. Cancel your reservation today. The table is set in the kingdom, and there is a seat for you there, but you have to leave your pride at the door. God bless you. And please, look at the empty chairs around you in your life, the people you have pushed away, and go fill them with love before it is too late.